Vance had always been a force in the office. Sharp dresser, fast talker, and never short on opinions. He carried himself with a kind of swagger that suggested he always knew what he was doing, and even more importantly, believed he was always the smartest in the room. He wasn't necessarily cruel or mean-spirited, but there was an edge to the way he interacted with others, a need to establish himself as the one with the upper hand in every conversation. He'd interrupt others mid-thought, someone said, to sound more clever, and subtly compete in moments that weren't even competitions. When Jasmine arrived, Vance quickly made assumptions. She was soft-spoken, polite, and didn't seem eager to stand out. Vance didn't see that as humility. He saw it as passiveness. He interpreted her calm presence as a sign of inexperience. To him, people who knew what they were doing showed it off. They took charge, spoke first, and corrected others. Jasmine didn't do any of that. But what Vance missed, and what others slowly began to notice, was that Jasmine wasn't trying to prove anything. She didn't chase credit in meetings. She didn't speak unless she had something meaningful to say. Her reports came in early and clean. When she contributed, it wasn't with long-winded opinions. It was with well-reasoned insights, supported by data. While Vance was busy making sure everyone heard him, Jasmine was quietly building a reputation rooted in respect. What set Jasmine apart was a kind of confidence that didn't seek attention. It didn't need validation. She knew what she brought to the table, and because of that, she didn't have to announce it. It's easy to mistake that for weakness in environments where loudness is mistaken for leadership. Vance certainly did. He made little jabs, usually with a smile, suggesting she might be in over her head, or that she had book smarts but not the instincts for real-world work. Jasmine never rose to the bait. She'd smile, give a quiet nod, and keep going. To someone like Vance, that was confusing. If she wasn't pushing back, maybe she agreed with him. Maybe she was unsure of herself. So when he half-jokingly suggested they take an online IQ test to settle a debate, he expected hesitation. Instead, Jasmine agreed with such composure that Vance figured she must not take it seriously. But what Vance couldn't see was that Jasmine wasn't playing along to prove anything to him. She was simply letting things unfold. While he was treating it like a challenge, a duel of intellects, she was treating it like any other task, calmly, methodically, and without ego. That was the real difference between them. Vance's confidence came from comparison. He needed to be smarter than someone else. He needed to win, to dominate, to correct. Jasmine's confidence didn't come from being better. It came from knowing herself. It wasn't shaken by doubts, or driven by a need to be seen. She had already done the hard work of self-assurance long before Vance entered the picture. And that's why the letter, the one she quietly handed him after the test, hit so hard. It wasn't just the fact that she was a member of Mensa, or that she had been for years. It was the timing, the quietness, and the intention behind it. She didn't pull it out to win. She didn't flaunt it when he made his first snide remark. She waited until the very moment where Vance would finally see it, not as a brag, but as clarity. Her intelligence wasn't loud, because it didn't need to be. Her self-worth wasn't built on proving people wrong, but on proving herself right. Through consistency.com and quiet certainty. That kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't seek attention or approval, unsettles people like Vance. Not because it's aggressive, but because it exposes how shallow, performative confidence really is. Vance had always associated intelligence with visibility. To him, the smartest people in the room were the ones who spoke up first, used technical jargon fluently, and jumped into debates without hesitation. He had built his entire image around this belief, always eager to take center stage during meetings, always the first to chime in with ideas, and always prepared with a well-timed quip to shut down an opposing view. In his mind, if people weren't hearing you, they weren't learning from you. And if they weren't learning from you, you probably weren't that smart to begin with. So when Jasmine joined the team, and said very little in her first few weeks, Vance quickly filed her away as someone who lacked sharpness. She wasn't shy, but she was selective. She listened more than she spoke. When she did contribute, it was brief, to the point, and often free of embellishment. Vance noticed it, but he didn't think much of it, not until others started reacting differently. Gradually. During meetings, managers began turning to Jasmine for her thoughts. When she spoke, people paid attention, not because she commanded it loudly, but because she had a way of cutting through the noise, while others, Vance included, would offer sprawling theories. Jasmine would point to one overlooked detail and suddenly change the entire direction of the discussion. Vance noticed something else that began to bother him, though he never said it out loud. Jasmine didn't seem to care about credit. She didn't stay after meetings to make sure her ideas were remembered. She didn't strategically align herself with leadership or send recap emails highlighting her contributions. Yet despite all of that, or maybe because of it, her reputation was growing. He began watching her more closely. At first, he looked for weaknesses, moments where she might fumble or say something naive, but those moments didn't come. What he saw instead was a kind of intelligence that didn't match his definition. She was observant. When others were talking, she was tracking patterns, absorbing context, listening not just to the words being said, but to what was being left unsaid. When she did speak, her words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were accurate and necessary. Vance couldn't understand how someone could appear so calm under pressure. When a last-minute client request threw the team into chaos, he launched into a flurry of half-baked solutions, trying to be the problem solver. Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't rush. She sat quietly for a minute, then asked one question. A simple, clear question that reframed the issue. The room shifted. People paused. She had said just one sentence, but it altered the course of the discussion. That moment stuck with him. He realized that while he was spending energy trying to be seen as intelligent, Jasmine was simply being intelligent. Her focus wasn't on performance, it was on understanding. She didn't need to showcase her intellect to feel validated. And ironically, that made her more respected. For someone like Vance, that was disorienting. He had built a professional identity around visibility. The idea that someone could be brilliant and mostly quiet felt almost threatening. But what he was witnessing was something he had never truly understood. Intelligence that's internal, self-guided, and detached from recognition. Jasmine's approach made him question things he had long taken for granted. She didn't try to win every conversation. She didn't fill silence with words just to appear engaged. Her mind wasn't constantly trying to impress others. It was busy analyzing, interpreting, and finding elegant solutions. And when he challenged her to that IQ test, he expected competition. He thought he could finally measure her against his own sense of superiority. But instead, she didn't compete, she clarified. She brought out that letter, not to humiliate him, but to remind him that true intelligence doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it's found in those who listen carefully, act deliberately, and know exactly who they are, even if they rarely say it out loud. Vance had always relied on sharpness and speed to get ahead. He prided himself on being the first to answer, the first to critique, and the first to dominate any discussion. His entire professional rhythm was built on reacting quickly, not necessarily thinking deeply, but being ready with something that sounded impressive. He believed instinct and charisma were the highest forms of intelligence in a high-pressure environment, and he treated preparation as something unnecessary. For people who are naturally smart, that mindset served him well, at least on the surface. In meetings, he spoke confidently, often without fully grasping the material, but his tone gave him the benefit of the doubt. People assumed he knew what he was talking about because he sounded sure. When projects were assigned, he often scrambled at the last minute, piecing things together with flair and jargon. He survived on cleverness and a well-practiced ability to shift blame when things didn't go perfectly. So, when Jasmine came along, she didn't fit into the pattern he recognized. She wasn't flashy. She didn't try to impress anyone with her vocabulary or interrupt to correct someone's dataset. In fact, she rarely spoke unless she had a clear reason to. But behind the scenes, she was always prepared, and Vance didn't notice it until it was too late. While he was busy sizing her up and making quiet jokes about her soft-spoken nature, Jasmine was quietly learning how everything worked. The systems, the politics, the priorities. She spent time reviewing reports that others glossed over. She asked specific questions when needed, and when deadlines came around, she was always ahead, never rushing, never cutting corners. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just doing the work. That difference became clear during a team presentation for an important client. Vance went in, as usual, depending on charm. He threw together slides the night before, rehearsed nothing, and counted on his presence to carry the day. Jasmine, on the other hand, had spent the week quietly researching the client's industry and refining her section. When the meeting happened, the contrast was undeniable. Vance stumbled when the client asked a follow-up question, something specific, something he hadn't considered. Jasmine stepped in without hesitation, answering clearly and concisely. Citing a stat he hadn't even heard before, there was no arrogance in her tone, no performance, just preparation. The client nodded, so did the rest of the room. That moment lingered with him, but he brushed it off. He told himself she had just gotten lucky with the question, but it wasn't luck, it was work. And then came the IQ test. Vance had floated the idea casually. Maybe half serious, maybe not, but once Jasmine agreed, it became something he took very seriously. He spent a few nights taking practice questions online, brushing up on logic puzzles and patterns. But even that was surface level. He wasn't preparing to understand. He was preparing to beat her. His goal wasn't growth, it was victory. Jasmine didn't seem to prepare at all. She didn't talk about it, didn't ask anyone what the test would be like. That baffled him. Was she not taking it seriously? Or maybe she didn't think it mattered. When they sat down to take the test, Vance was all intensity, fingers tapping, eyes darting, taking deep breaths like he was entering a competition arena. Jasmine was calm, relaxed, and focused, like she was simply doing something familiar. 30 minutes later, the test ended, and Vance leaned back, feeling unsure but still hopeful. But then Jasmine did something that changed the entire tone. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. There was no fanfare, no smirk, just a quiet confidence as she handed it to him. The letter was from Mensa, dated 5 years ago. Jasmine had already passed their rigorous testing and had been a verified member ever since. Vance stared at the paper, not quite knowing what to say. She hadn't needed to prepare for his challenge. She had already done the work long before. The idea even crossed his mind. While he was scrambling to get an edge in the moment, she had built her foundation steadily and privately over time. Her advantage didn't come from reacting faster. It came from consistently preparing, understanding, and thinking beyond appearances. For the first time, he realized what real readiness looked like. Not improvisation, not charm, but depth. Jasmine didn't rely on last-minute effort to get ahead. She was already ahead because she never stopped preparing. Vance had always believed that winning meant being seen. In his world, success wasn't quiet. It was loud, fast, and undeniable. The more visible you were, the more people respected you. So he leaned into that. He was the guy who cracked jokes in meetings, who corrected people mid-sentence with a grin, and who made sure his voice filled every room. He wanted to be unmistakable. When he shared an idea, he wanted people to nod. When he challenged someone, he expected them to flinch. He was used to winning by dominating conversations, and he measured intelligence by how confidently someone could speak under pressure. That's why Jasmine confused him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to respond. She let conversations breathe, often waiting until others were done talking before offering a thought. And even then, she chose her words carefully. Vance. That wasn't strength. At first he thought it was hesitance. He assumed she lacked the edge to keep up. But what Vance didn't see was the power in her restraint. Jasmine wasn't trying to win every exchange. She wasn't fighting for attention or proving herself through force. She was playing a longer game, one that wasn't built on noise, but on substance. When she disagreed with something, she didn't raise her voice or defend herself impulsively. Instead, she'd ask a question that reframed the entire conversation. It wasn't confrontational. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it shifted the energy in the room every time. People didn't always notice it was her who redirected things, but over time, they started turning to her when things got complicated. Vance began to feel it, even if he didn't want to admit it. In meetings, when Jasmine spoke, people stopped talking. They listened, not out of fear or obligation, but out of interest. Her insights weren't flashy, but they stuck. And when she offered solutions, they worked. Still, Vance clung to the belief that presence meant dominance. So when he challenged her to an IQ test, he treated it like a show. He joked about it with coworkers, hinted that he'd crush her, and even wore his lucky blazer that day, as if confidence alone could guarantee a win. Jasmine, in contrast, said nothing about it in advance. She didn't make it into a spectacle. She just agreed, quietly, and moved on. When the test started, Vance approached it like a performance. He was intense, animated, glancing at the clock, trying to get through each question quickly. Jasmine was calm, steady, and focused, as if she was taking a walk through familiar territory. Then, right after the timer ran out, Vance turned toward her, expecting to compare scores, maybe make a joke about the results, but Jasmine didn't say a word about the test. Instead, she pulled a sealed letter from her bag and handed it to him. He looked down. The envelope was simple, cream-colored, with a formal header, Mensa, International. He opened it. Inside was a letter certifying Jasmine as a Mensa member, issued years ago long before she'd ever met him. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The test suddenly felt irrelevant. While he had turned the experience into a contest, Jasmine had already done the work, achieved the distinction, and moved on, all without ever bringing it up. And that's what truly shook him. She could have mentioned her Mensa status from day one. She could have worn it like a badge, used it as leverage in arguments, or even flashed it as a warning to back off. But she never did. She didn't need to. Her intelligence wasn't something she had to prove. It was something she carried, quietly like a foundation under everything she did. Vance realized then that not every victory is loud. Some wins come quietly, in sealed letters and silent confidence. Jasmine didn't need the room to applaud her. She didn't need to announce her qualifications. The truth was, she had already won, not because she outperformed him in a single test, but because she never had to compete to begin with. Her silence had been her strength. Her calm had been her clarity. And the letter. It wasn't a dramatic reveal. It was simply the proof of what had been true all along. In the days that followed, something shifted, not just in Vance's perception of Jasmine, but in the way he understood intelligence, success, and self-worth. He had spent so much of his professional life chasing recognition, trying to outshine the people around him, believing that being the loudest and quickest would always make him the most respected. But Jasmine's quiet confidence exposed something he hadn't been ready to confront. He had been performing while she had been building. There was no confrontation after the IQ test. No dramatic fallout, no heated exchange. Jasmine didn't gloat, She didn't even bring it up again. She returned to her desk, resumed her work, and continued exactly as she had before. Steady, focused, unbothered. For her, intelligence wasn't a tool to win arguments or boost ego. It was something internal, something she used to understand the world and contribute meaningfully to it. That was the difference. Vance couldn't ignore the respect she quietly commanded, not through showmanship, but through presence. The kind that comes from preparation, patience, and knowing exactly who you are without needing others to validate it. He started to reflect more, listen more, and even for the first time in a long while, ask questions he didn't already think he knew the answers to. It's not that Vance became someone entirely different overnight, but he began to carry himself with less urgency to prove, and more curiosity to learn. Jasmine had never tried to change him. She never lectured or corrected him. She simply modeled a different kind of strength, one that didn't need a spotlight to matter. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not all power has to announce itself. Not all brilliance demands attention. Sometimes, the most impactful people in the room are the ones who speak last, observe longest, and let their results speak for themselves. Jasmine never set out to crush Vance. She didn't seek a win, but in that quiet moment, when she handed him the envelope, she offered something far more lasting than a one-time victory. She gave him a reason to rethink what intelligence really looks like, and in doing so, she walked away not just respected, but